Let's, without further ado, please welcome the incomparable Shellye Archambeau.
Hi, Danica. How are you?
I'm doing great, Shellye. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing wonderful. It's a beautiful day here in Silicon Valley.
I love to hear it. That's excellent news. And I hope that you've been enjoying your time in California. I know that you're out there quite a bit. And we're so excited to have you as our first inaugural Fireside Chat guest. This is such a thrilling experience that we have our wonderful lit subscribers here who can hear directly from you, one of their heroes, I'm sure. And I see your book in the background, which makes me really happy. Well, obviously, to start us off, we don't know everyone's background here in the chat. And so we'd love for you just to introduce yourself, give a little bit of background of yourself professionally, and just a little background on Unapologetically Ambitious.
Oh, certainly. So I am a woman who aspired early to be a CEO. I didn't know what that meant exactly. All I knew is my guidance counselor told me that business was like running clubs, pull people together and get things done. And I loved that when I was in high school. So I said, great, then I'll go into business and I want to aspire to run one because I love running clubs. And I spent my entire career, frankly, focused on that goal. So I joined IBM, I rose through the ranks where I was ultimately running operations in the US as well as overseas. I got to the point where my boss reported to the CEO of IBM. There wasn't anyone higher than me that looked like me. And I wasn't quite sure, based upon things that were happening, that I was actually going to get the opportunity to truly compete for the CEO job. But CEO was my goal. So I worked my way to Silicon Valley, made the hard decision to leave IBM, where I was the chief marketing officer and EVP of sales for 2 public companies, and then got my opportunity at the age of 40 to be CEO of a company that became MetricStream. I ran MetricStream for 15 years, turned it into a global market leader in governance, risk, and compliance. And now I serve on boards, advise companies, coach CEOs, and try to inspire and impact others to go after their aspirations and help them with how to achieve it. And that's why I wrote the book, Unapologetically Ambitious, because I've always tried to be accessible during my career. I couldn't always meet with people individually as I took on more and more responsibility, but I'd always respond. And I thought, when I get to the point where I have bandwidth, when I enter phase 2, I want to take the time and write down. I want to write down what I learned, what worked, what didn't, so that others can hopefully have an easier time navigating the challenges of building your career and achieving your overall aspirations. So that's what Unapologetically Ambitious, take risks, break barriers, and create success on your own terms. It's really what it's about. How to be intentional and make the decisions and trade-offs and take the risks to enable you to achieve your aspirations.
Well, it certainly inspired all of us here at Lit, and thank you for giving us that beautiful overview. We were so excited to turn Unapologetically Ambitious into a video book. And I would love to know, just from your perspective, because we actually didn't talk after the whole process. We, of course, know how to turn a book into a video book, but how is the experience for you as the author? And also, this was such a personal story. Did you find new inspiration from watching the video book? Were you excited by certain elements that we were able to bring to life just from your beautiful written word?
It was actually a fun experience, and I had no idea what to expect. Because even though you had shared, a couple that you had done before, it was still hard to imagine, how are they going to take my story and turn this into a video book rather. And frankly, it was really funny to see me animated and see my late husband animated, just to see on screen. And so anyway, so that was really funny. And it was really interesting to hear firsthand the people that I talked about in the book actually speaking live in the video book and sharing their perspectives. So it was great.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, we were so excited to include so many voices. I think we had 9 different voices who spoke on your behalf. And I will say, we would send one email, hey, are you interested in helping Shellye? Yes, would be the response, including from people like Ben Horowitz, who is obviously so busy. And we were just so excited to include everyone. And obviously the animation and turning you into an animated character was really exciting on our end. I love the scene with you and Scotty dancing when you first meet. It's such a fun experience. So if you haven't watched the video book yet, definitely check it out. It's a really, really personal story. Shellye's parents also speak in it. We have tons of archive throughout her life. It's really, really special. But of course, we have a couple topics that we'd love to dive into today with you because you have all this wonderful expertise and you have devoted the second part of your life to giving back and sharing what you know and how to help others. So the first theme that we came up with after watching the video back was career resilience. That's obviously a theme that you have throughout your entire journey. And so that will be our first theme we are going to discuss today. And we're going to show a clip. And in this clip, we are going to see how Shellye turned lemons into lemonade. And that was as the CEO of Zaplet, which you just spoke about, your first CEO position. Now MetricStream will learn how that all happened. And this was back when the market was tanking in 2002. So let's take a look.
It's 2002, a year after the Silicon Valley tech bubble burst. Companies have gone out of business. The place is crawling with CEOs looking for work. And I had the disadvantage of having no CEO credentials. I had to find a company that was challenged, that would be open to someone a little different. I eventually found the opportunity in a communications tech company called Zaplet. And that's where I learned the lesson, never say die. So I took over Zaplet. And the first step, was trying to stop the hemorrhaging. So we had to do more cuts. I went out there and talked to all the smartest people I could find and came back and decided we needed to focus the company on compliance and risk management. And so that's what we did. So suddenly our phones are ringing. Then came a momentous meeting with Gunjan Sinha, CEO of a quality management and compliance company called MetricStream.
And Zaplet had burned through, bulk of the capital. And remember, I did not know her. She did not know me. She was firstly comfortable and disarming. Even though we were meeting for the first time, there was a genuine authenticity in the interaction. And that's when I guess we had that aha moment and we said, let's just team up.
We said, listen, let's put the two together and go after comprehensive compliance and risk, because they had applications people. They had people who actually sold to business folks.
We brought MetricStream and Zaplet together, and the company, took on the name of MetricStream. She became the CEO, and I took on the chairman role.
And here we are, living on fumes. Fumes, because remember, we spent our money with the idea that we were going to grow and then raise money on that trajectory. So we'd limp into 2009. We talked about how we could cut costs, taking pay cuts. So I had to come home. I had to come home and tell Scotty.
Hey, babe, how would you feel if I didn't pay myself for a year?
Now remember, he's a stay-at-home dad at this point. I'm the only wage earner.
Okay, if anybody could save that company, it's you.
We not only survived in 2009, but we grew. We grew significantly.
She led the company from 2004 all the way to 2017 when she stepped down. MetricStream is a global leader in governance, risk, and compliance. So we have helped create this market, and we are now, leading this market in every which way.
I love that clip. What a story.
Yes, it was it was an incredible period. It's probably one of the hardest things I've ever worked through in my career.
And to take a chance on yourself and on a company like that is obviously so inspiring. So we do have a few questions that we'd love to just kind of kick off this theme of career resilience with. Obviously, this was back in 2002 and then 2009, two periods of severe economic downturn, especially when the Silicon Valley bubble burst, as we talk about in the beginning of that clip. And here, post-COVID, we are hearing constantly from experts that we might be heading toward another economic downturn, maybe a potential recession looming that keeps coming up on the back burner. And obviously, we've seen significant layoffs in the tech industry. So we'd love to know if you have any advice for leaders who are weathering this now, or what you're seeing out there here in 2023 that might be able to help us based on the experience you had during those times.
Certainly. So the first is realize that leadership is more important than ever. Employees are sitting there saying, oh my God, how is this going to affect the company? How is it going to affect me? Am I going to be okay? And that's what's rumbling through their mind. So they're looking to their managers, to their bosses for, frankly, psychological support right? And encouragement, because they want to know, am I going to be okay? So they're looking at their leaders to say, am I going to be okay? So it's really important at this phase is communication, communication, communication. Because if you aren't communicating, people will make it up and they'll imagine all kinds of horrific things. So frequent, accurate information that gives them perspective on what the company's doing, where it's going, is just critically important. That's how you start to build trust. And the key is accurate, right? Don't paint it like, oh, everything's going to be wonderful. They know it's not. So share, here are the challenges, here's what we're doing about it. Because that's what will build confidence in how they think about the company and think about themselves. So communications is just critically important during this stage.
Absolutely. I mean, that makes a ton of sense. I think for leaders who are maybe newer, do you have any tips of how you, I don't know if you're leading one-on-ones these days or at the forefront of communication as you serve on boards, but maintaining that strong, resilient presence, but while also having to do the research for yourself, do you have any tips or tricks that you found really useful when you were back in that kind of grunt work of leading teams every day?
Yeah, one of the mantras I always carried in my head was, and I don't remember who told me this first, but it was, things are never as good as they appear, and they're never as bad as they appear. And so if you keep that in mind, it helps you be steady. I would apologize, I have allergies.
No worries, they've been horrible in New York. So as I like grace
yeah.
myself with flowers, I'm really asking for it.
Indeed, sorry about that.
No,
But
you're
anyway,
fine.
so what that means is people are looking to you to be steady. So if you are going up and down like, oh, things are wonderful and things are horrible and things are wonderful and things are horrible, your whole company is going to go up and down. And trust me, they are really paying attention, especially during challenging times, to not just what you say, not just how you behave. They're looking at your body language because they're trying to figure out, are you worried? Are you concerned? Right? Should I be worried? Should I be concerned? So when you speak, when you act, when you just show body language, it actually reverberates a whole lot louder than you think. So it's really, really important as the leader to hold yourself, in essence, in check and make sure that you are coming across confident. Yes, what we're going through is hard. Yes, we have to make hard decisions, right? It's fine to say that, but here's what we're doing about it. Here's where we're going. But if you're walking around wringing your hands, really concerned, acting nervous, the whole company will, in essence, be doing the same thing. And if they're doing that, they're not executing. And guess what? You're going to be at higher risk.
Absolutely. When it comes to this remote work world that we're in, would you recommend having these conversations on a Zoom call, a call that has video element included so that you can have, your body language portrayed? And
Absolutely. People need to be seen and heard, whether that's virtual, right, or in person. And, when I talk about frequent communications, I mean everything from all hands to meeting with your leadership team to all of that. One of my companies that I sit on the board of during COVID, when everybody was like, oh my God, what's happening? What does this mean? They had daily, literally, they had daily noon calls every day where the CEO or direct report of CEO would basically get up and say, here's what's happening, here's what we're doing, here's what's going on, right? And it made a huge difference. People knew that they were going to hear what's going on instead of just making it up and being concerned. So when I say frequent, you tie the frequency to just how challenging the environment is that you're facing.
Absolutely. Reading that, understanding that makes a lot of sense. Well, to pivot a little bit, there's also another hot topic that's been coming up a lot in the last few months, and that is AI. Obviously, it's
just a little
bit. I'm sure people have heard of ChatGPT and all of the integrations that AI is providing for many of the services we use. We are seeing more and more leaders turn to AI, and they're turning to it to cut costs, increase efficiency, everything in between. And we just love to know your thoughts on this tech revolution, but also, what should we be mindful of? How can we use it to our advantage? But also, where do we want to be careful?
Sure. So first of all, when you think about AI, people say AI, but today we're really talking about two different types. You have the traditional AI, which has been around for a while, and that is one that really leverages everything from data models, analytics, et cetera, to help augment, people use chatbots all the time, maybe with success, maybe with not, but they use chatbots. I mean, that's traditional AI. It's when you've actually created, the what if statements, right? You've given it a lot of data and help it figure out how to answer. It's not really creating brand new original content, right? It's taking information and being able to use. I mean, Google uses AI, right, to actually help with searches and things like that. Generative AI is what's really new. And the generative AI is all about using all kinds of inputs to create original content. And that's the key, original content. And so how do I feel about it? Hey, I'm excited about it. I mean, I know a lot of people are worried, and we'll talk about it, but every time there's a new technology on the front that's going to upend, change, disrupt things, people get all nervous. I mean, back in the heyday, railroads, oh my God, they said if women rode on railroads, their uteruses would fly out. I mean, it was crazy stuff. All right. All I'm saying is every time a new technology comes, all kinds of boogeyman oriented things, right, are developed and talked about. But if you think about it, the power that it will bring to augment human activities, human thought, and then to actually take over and do a lot of things that are rote and manual, where you really don't need a lot of creativity, et cetera, it is amazing. So I'm actually very excited about it, but realize it's still really young, really young. And because it's creating new content and it's young, it's often wrong. I mean, it's like if you asked a 10-year-old, why is the sky blue? Odds are really low that a 10-year-old would give you the right answer. Right now, they'll use whatever information they've got available to them, right, at that time, and they'll come up with something to talk about why it's blue, but they're probably going to be wrong. Well, generative AI is the same way. I asked it, for instance, how many sisters does Shellye Archambeau have? And it thinks I have 3 sisters. I only have 2. One's a doctor, one's a lawyer, one's a teacher. Well, they got one right. One is a professor at a university, right? It tells me that I'm married to someone called Eric Archambeau. No, right? And my brother is Gunjan Sinha, who you just saw in that video. Okay, so realize that it is young, it is new, it's going to often be wrong right now. And that's also not necessarily how it's best used. If you want to know facts, that's one thing. It really needs to be used in a very creative way, right, in terms of models. So we're going to learn and we're going to figure this out, but we just need to make sure that as we move forward, we're careful and realize what stage it's at. You would never give a 10-year-old a driver's license, right? What stage is it at? And as it matures, then we'll be able to take more advantage of it in a wider variety of things.
I love that. Thank you for breaking it down between the generative AI and the regular AI, because I think that's a really important thing for us to consider, because you're right, we have been using this AI for years. I'm Googling couches every day as I'm couch shopping, and it's telling me all the couches that I might want to buy. So that's a really, really smart way to break it down. So our third question, obviously from watching that clip, it's very clear you had to make some big changes and pivot to get to the CEO point, and then also pivot with Zaplet as you understood the business and the challenges that were ahead of you. And we would just love to know from your perspective, how important is learning to pivot, and how important is it to take career risks, which is in the title of your book?
Yes, I'm a big believer in taking risks. Risk and reward are 2 sides of the same coin. So if you aren't taking risks, you just aren't going to get the rewards. The whole legal structure of a corporation was created so that people could come together to take shared risk. It is the fundamental aspect of business. You can't grow, you can't launch a new product, you can't enter a new market without taking risk. So risk you're taking in your business, but you also need to take in your own life for the same reason. If you aren't taking risks, you're not going to get the opportunities, right? And therefore have the reward. So it's absolutely imperative in my mind to actually take risks. And that doesn't mean any risk. You don't walk to the edge of a cliff and just jump off because, oh, here's a risk, let me take it, right? You want to make sure you take risks that you have thought through and you understand. Best thing that can happen, worst thing can happen, can you live with it? And what I find about taking risks is, if you think about the risks that you're facing, And if you literally take the time to write it down, okay, what's the risk? What's the worst that could happen? What's the best that could happen? You tend to be able to actually deal with it because now it's tangible. If you just leave it in your mind and you let it reverberate, it just gets bigger than life. So that's one of the ways that I approach risk. And pivoting is just an example of taking a risk. And pivoting is important. I mean, imagine you would never get in your car, head to the grocery store, come up on a roadblock because maybe they're doing some construction and say, oh, my path is blocked, turn off the car, park, and wait until it's done. Right? You would never do that. Well, if you don't pivot when you need to pivot, it's the same thing. It's like, oh, well, I wanted this opportunity. It's not available now. So let me just sit here until somebody gives it to me. No, you figure out, okay, what's another way to achieve it? Whether it's within the same company, within a different company, who do you need to talk to? What help can you ask for, right? Just like if you're at the roadblock, you use help, you pull up your GPS and say, okay, what's the other way I can get there, right? So asking for help and being intentional about making sure that you are continuing to move forward is critical. And when you do that, new opportunities will arise.
Absolutely. I love the car park analogy. If we could go back and add that to unapologetically ambitious, I think that's such a great visual. Well, obviously, career-wise, we know what an extraordinary journey you've had, and we spoke a lot about career resilience, but we'd love to move on and talk a little bit about personal resilience. And I love how brave you are in sharing your story. This is such a personal experience, both watching the video book and reading the book. And I think it's really important to see leaders like yourself be brave and tell the truth. So thank you for that. So we're going to look a little bit at a clip about personal resilience, and you will see how upon a move to Japan, Shellye realized that being an outsider was actually an advantage. Let's take a look.
I'm Tim McChristian. I'm currently the executive director for Madison Square Boys and Girls Club here in New York City. I had a long career with IBM, and like many IBMers, I moved around a lot. So I met this tall, impressive young lady who was Shellye Archambeau, and we actually did work on the same team. Well, I had moved to Japan. I think I had probably been there at least a year. This was considered one of the premier assignments in the IBM executive ranks because of the tremendous business growth. So there was a long line of people who would like to have come to Asia Pacific. And so Shellye obviously had been performing outstanding in her position in the US, and I was fortunate enough to be the hiring executive.
So anyway, we get over to Japan, and it is indeed a very, very different environment. But here's what's interesting. Turns out, I was better prepared than I thought for this assignment, because I'd spent my whole career being the minority. I knew what it was like to be the minority. So when I came to Japan and was facing the same thing, not necessarily because I was a Black female, but just because I wasn't Japanese and I was female, people having a little skepticism, I'm used to all that. Early on, I had to give a presentation. When my first slide popped up, I heard whispering. I thought to myself, oh no, did the interpreter mess up the Japanese on the slides? What does it say? I later learned that at the time, American executives like me usually didn't have their presentations translated from English at all. They weren't offended. They were impressed. I'm a big believer in servant leadership. I just focus on the team. How can I help the team be successful? If the team is successful, then I'll be successful.
The team is successful, I'll be successful. If that's not a mantra to live by in a company. I love this clip. I love seeing how your fear turned into shock and awe and surprise in a good way. And obviously, you know, a lot of this has to come with personal resilience. And of course, being a person of color in an industry where there weren't a whole lot of people who looked like you and who had backgrounds like yours. And so we'd just love to know, in what ways do you feel like being a person of color has been an advantage during your career?
Yes, that's a great question, because there's many disadvantages for sure. But from an advantage standpoint, you know, one of the first, which has pros and cons, is when you're in a space like tech and you're an executive, being a Black female, there aren't very many of us. So people tend to remember you. Now that's a good thing if you're doing well. It's not a good thing if they don't remember you and you're not very good, right? So, but I did find that to be an advantage, that one, people would remember me because I was unusual. But the other advantage, and it was talked to in the clip, is because I've been a minority in the US, I always felt that as I took on a new role, that people would underestimate me. Either think I got the role for reasons other than my competence, right? Or because I'm a female, right? Maybe I'm not, all the things that people have, all the biases, right, that come. So I always approached it that, all right, as I walk into this new job, everything I've done doesn't necessarily come with me. It's not like I have this, reputation that everybody just acknowledges, accepts, and moves on. I always have to prove myself. So that notion is what's enabled me to, frankly, move to different locations, move different companies, move to different countries, and still be successful, because I operate like none of that comes with me. I've got to start all over again. And the team focus and that whole servant leadership approach really makes a difference, because my first step is trying to build the trust and support of the team that I'm leading. And if I can do that and do that quickly, then I'm able to actually execute and execute well, because it all starts with that overall relationship.
The trust is necessary. And it's so wonderful to hear you speak about how you've been able to capitalize on this and reframe it almost for yourself of how can I use this? So what advice would you give to young leaders who might feel like outsiders for whatever reason, and who might also be able to capitalize off of their outsider potential?
Yeah, lean into it is number one. When I first started my career, I'll never forget. I mean, this was in the early 80s. And back then there were very few females, forget people of color, in tech. And therefore, women went to work looking just like the guys. The pinstripe suits, the white cotton shirts, the little silk bow ties, except instead of hanging, we tied them in a little bow, right? I mean, it was crazy. And I tried very hard to act like I wasn't a woman. They told me, I got advice, don't put pictures of your family up, right? All those things. And I'll tell you, it was exhausting. It was exhausting. So it's really important. It took me a few years. I wish it was quick, but it wasn't. It took me a few years to kind of realize, what? I'm just better if I'm me versus trying to act like I'm in kind of this jacket. So what I would tell people who feel like outsiders, yes, you need to adapt to the culture, right? It's just like going to Japan. If I went to Japan and tried to run meetings like meetings are run in the US, I would fail miserably. As a matter of fact, I tried once and I failed miserably. The culture is different, and therefore you have to adapt to the culture. That doesn't mean you change who you are. It doesn't mean you change your values, right? You just operate within the culture. So think about your company or your industry as a culture that, yes, you need to adapt to the culture, but don't change who you are. And then I find you'll actually be more successful, and you'll have more bandwidth to be able to do what you need to do and focus on what you need to focus on. So don't hide that difference, right? Try to leverage it as you move forward.
It's a beautiful outlook, and obviously requires us to do some inner work as well and figure out who we are so we can bring that to the table, which obviously you've done so much of. And we love that you're who you are. That's why we're all so excited to have you as such a leader in this industry. So my last question for this portion before we head into our Q&A is, when it comes to how you found your way, obviously there weren't people ahead of you who were paving those roads. And we all like to lean on historical figures or people that we look up to, heroes, things of the sort. And so we'd just love to know how have leaning on historical figures, their stories, helped you grow into the leader that you are today? And how do you recommend this approach to young leaders too, looking backward to go forward?
Yes, I really leaned on people who had done things, historically, to gain and build my courage. Because I'll tell you, courage is really important. If you don't have courage, it's going to be harder to take risks. If you don't have courage, it's going to be harder to lead, right? If you don't have courage, it's going to be challenging to actually go do something new and different. So I really focused on building courage. And what I would remind myself when I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do this, right? Can I do this? Or no one who looks like me has done this before, was, you know what? Somebody has to be first. Somebody has to be first. Looked up at all the people who had done things first. And So it might as well be me, right? If others could do it, then I can do it. If others could handle what they battled and what they, what were faced with and still push through, then I certainly can. So that's really how I think about it in terms of leveraging people in the past and thinking about what they've done.
It's a beautiful perspective. We're so happy that you did so and led the way for us to inspire all of us. And apparently we are very inspired because we have a ton of Q&A questions.
Oh, good.
So these are completely off the cuff. We have not prepared these. These are from you live. So thank you, attendees. If you included your name, we'll give you a little shout out. And I apologize in advance if I get your name wrong. I'll do my best. But let's get to it. We might go to even 1250 because we've got so many good ones coming in. It's hard to pick, Okay, so the first one is from Fabian. And Fabian asks, your book came out in 2020 and things change, especially in the last few years. If you get the opportunity to update anything in your book, what would it be?
Oh, it's a good question. I'd probably share more stories about resilience and having to, I talk about pivot. I have a whole chapter on pivoting. So I call it swerve, right? There's a whole section on that. And I might just amp it up a little bit more because I think people are facing more of that right now.
Absolutely. It is a time that we don't have the answers to all the time. Wonderful. Well, hopefully we get to see that update someday. We will update the Unapologetically Ambitious video book if you ever update the regular book. So from Pete, in a rapidly evolving business landscape, how do you ensure that your organization fosters a culture of continuous learning and adaptation?
Oh, this is a great question because it is so, so, so important. So one is talk about it. And I know that sounds so basic, but if people realize from their leadership that it's important, that it's valued, and that it gets highlighted and acknowledged, then they'll actually do it. I'll give you a simple example of something you can do around kind of a learning, adapting, or whatever. When you have a staff meeting, team meeting, right? If learning is the most important thing right now, fine. Start it with, hey, let's do a quick around the table. What has anybody learned new in the last 30 days that they can share? Just quick, 5 minutes. Well, here's what'll happen. If you start doing that, I don't know, once a quarter, people will make sure they've learned something to be able to share because they don't want it to come to them and have nothing to say, right? So there are different ways to show that, hey, this is important by encouraging and changing, behavior. So that's a really simple example of how to do it.
That's a great idea. Yeah. Make it a group discussion, make it something that you're all invested in, not just the people at the top. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Pete, for asking. This is an anonymous question, so I'm not sure who asked it, but it might be a bot because it's about AI. So given the rapid advancements in AI, what advice would you give your kids if they were thinking of what they want to study in college?
Ah, so interesting. I honestly think what will be more important going forward is not the ability to do as much as the ability to ask the right questions and analyze. So it's, to me, asking the right questions is going to become even more important because you can get the information you need if you know how to ask, right? Or you know how to drive. So that whole logic. So studies around, I encourage them to take courses in things like philosophy, which is all about asking questions, right? Definitely analytics. But those are the people whose skills are going to be really valued as we go forward.
That's a great tip. And if we have any college students in here or future college students, definitely take that advice to heart.
Right. And make sure you still take some computer science or programming class, not to be the programmer, right? I mean, you can do that. That's what you like to do, but to just understand how it works so that you're then able to, again, use it to help you with your analysis and your questioning. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we could all probably do that because it has changed a lot. From Matt, how has managing work-life integration changed for you in the last few years now that so much work is done from home?
Oh, actually, I have found it easier. Now, remember, I'm also in phase 2. So right now I don't have my always on operating job. I have a whole portfolio, right, of jobs, which makes it easier to manage. But I actually believe that the hybrid working gives people more flexibility to be able to integrate their lives than even before. So I see it as a positive thing. No matter what level of hybrid, kind of stays in place, doesn't stay in place, etc. The fact that people actually have lives, and everybody does at all levels. I think one of the things that's happened during COVID is everyone became humanized.
Yeah.
Because everyone was on a call where their child came screaming into the room, or the dog, went crazy, or something. We've all had, and you see, oh, that's life, right? That's life. So I think overall, that's a positive.
Absolutely. And it's really so fascinating. That was such a big part of your book. And I am curious, yeah, if this was your CEO of Zaplet time, how it would have been different for you today. And I'm glad that you're finding it, just at least in phase 2, to be even easier. So we have a similar question from an anonymous person. We kind of touched on this earlier with having video calls, but do you have any additional tips for leading in a remote environment with a fully remote team? A lot of the Lit team in particular are fully remote. And so I did not write this question, but I'm actually very curious to know the answer.
Sure. So in addition to communications, I think the other element that's important is career development. When you aren't able to touch people informally often, to be able to just give a little coaching, give a little advice, or hey, when you did this, you might have done such and such, right? Just that little bit. My big concern with fully remote is you don't have that informal connecting time and development time. So what that means is you've actually got to be more intentional about it as a manager or as a team lead. Because if you're not intentional about it, those little things that you would have passed along or shared will be lost. And trust me, those are really important developmental aspects. And people want to grow and they want to develop. So you have to be intentional, either schedule time to do it, right? Or find a different way in terms of making sure that people are getting constructive feedback that is helpful to them. And if you're the employee and you're not getting it and you're working remote, my biggest advice to you is ask for it. Now, here's the key. Don't say, oh, can you give me feedback? Because when you do that, the manager's like, oh my gosh, where do I even start? What's that mean? It's this big amorphous feedback. Much better if you ask a very specific question. Danica, you're in the whole production, right, side of the business. So when you're talking to your manager, you might say, hey, we just did a fireside chat for the first time. Any advice on what I could do to make it even better next time, right? I mean, make it specific, because on specifics, people will be able to actually give you input that's helpful versus answer you with a wave of hands, say, oh, you're doing fine. That's not helpful. So it works both ways. But I do believe the feedback and development is the piece that has the biggest risk in fully remote teams.
That makes a lot of sense, because you do have to seek it out and you do have to be intentional about it. So very, very good advice. You also kind of lose like the water cooler talk, if you will. And this question next is a fun one, which is, what are you currently reading and watching? This is from Danielle. She's curious if there's anything that you're reading or watching, both for education and for fun, that you'd want to share.
Okay, so I really don't watch much, meaning, I left at home in Tampa for I'm now over 2 years, almost 3, going on 3 years, and I've never myself turned on the television. I don't watch TV. But in terms of reading, I am currently reading The End of the World is Just the Beginning, which is about the end of globalization as we know it today and what opportunities and risks it kind of brings for different countries and businesses. So anyway, that's what I'm reading. It's actually quite fascinating.
Sounds fascinating. I'm definitely putting that on my list. Thank you for the tip. All right, this is our last question from Anonymous. So Anonymous, I hope you're listening. How do you keep yourself focused daily with normal tasks and in the long term?
Okay, so the first thing I do to keep myself focused is I practice self-care. I learned the hard way. If you've read the book, you know, or watched the video book, but I learned the hard way in my late 20s, the importance of self-care, when I actually went through a bout of depression. I didn't even know what it was. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I just knew that suddenly I'm having trouble getting out of bed. I'm not motivated. I'm just feeling terrible. I'm thinking, gosh, if this is what working and having a family, everything is all about, maybe I'm not cut out for it. Which I'm like, this is crazy. What's wrong? So I went to go see a psychologist. And what I learned was I wasn't taking care of myself. I was giving 100% of myself away to everybody else. So I learned that there are 3 things that I need for self-care. I need to eat 3 meals a day. And it sounds basic, but most people don't. I don't count granola bar and a cup of coffee. And I need to exercise regularly. And I need social interaction with adults at least twice a week. So that's what I need. And when I have that, now I have the foundation to be able to stay focused and productive. So then how do I do it? I literally have, here right on my desk, I literally have a notebook, right? You can probably see all that stuff. But anyway, I literally have a notebook. And I write down, I have a whole symbols for stuff. So all my action items, I put a little box, right? When I've done something against it, I put a check mark. When I've done part of the response, but it's not complete, it gets a slash. When it's done, it gets an X. I mean, literally, I have this process for how I keep track of everything that I need to do. Now, short-term, long-term, that is definitely kind of, think of it as short-term and ongoing. Some things move. Long-term, I always have, not surprising, okay, here's my plan, here's what I'm trying to do. I set goals for myself. And then quarterly, I kind of sit back and say, okay, how am I doing against my goals? And I also look at my calendar for the last quarter, because I look to say, am I spending my time in a way that's consistent with my priorities? Because you know what? The reason I do that is because I found at times I wasn't. And if you're not spending time against your priorities, guess what? They're not going to happen. They're just not going to happen. So that's what I do.
Love it. I love how intentional you are with everything. And that coding and checking gives us that satisfaction that, goes back to childhood, of course, of getting the gold star. And we want to give you 1,000,000 gold stars for today. This was such a pleasure, Shellye. You are so insightful. You were so gracious with your time. And you really have been such an inspiration to all of us here at Lit, and also I know all the attendees. So thank you, thank you. I know they're all cheering and clapping. If you can't hear them, they're out there.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I've absolutely enjoyed it. And feel free, by the way, to follow me on social media. LinkedIn, Instagram, I put a lot of stuff out there, just trying to share, inspire, and encourage other people.
Yes, your account is one of my absolute favorites, so I could not upvote that more. Please go follow Shellye. We'd also love for you to follow Lit. We are on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, everywhere that you would mostly find the normal sites to be found. And we also will be sharing our next Fireside chat information through those platforms, which will be with author and behavioral psychologist Dan Ariely of Predictably Irrational. And we are really, really excited for Dan to come talk. He's so fun. He obviously has had such a great history in his field. And so it's really going to be a great one. So make sure you check it out. And we also are going to be following up with a survey for our attendees. We would love your feedback. As Shellye was just saying, it's so important for us as a company to keep growing and giving you what you all want. So please feel free to participate in that. Be honest. Let us know how we can keep making Lit an experience that you love and keep coming back to, because we love what we do. We love making books into video books. And we're so thrilled to have you all here as All Access subscribers. So thank you again. Thank you, Shellye. I hope you all have a great week, and we can't wait to see you again.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.